When's the last time you've been on vacation? My last vacation was in Palm Springs, and I was there because I was going to an upside down pineapple party. I wrote a little bit about that experience over on my blog, blackandthecity.com. If you want to know about that, go over and read over there. But one of the resorts that I went to while I was out there had a like sex maze that was all painted up like a jungle. And I found out that they were going to get rid of it between now and next year. So I wanted to get footage of it. And it was probably the most exotic thing that I've seen at least in the past year. Maybe I need to get out a bit more. But if you haven't been on vacation recently, watching the most recent season of White Lotus is sure to make you feel like maybe you should book that trip to Thailand. The third season of the HBO hit show is, well, very messy. There are a lot of moments, we'll just say. Let's just say that I was a little traumatized by some of the things that happened in this season. I don't think brothers should ever be that close personally. You know, call me a liberal. Call me a liberal. There's a really great commentary on the girl that I was when I was like chasing after these old ass men. If you are someone who finds yourself in relationships like that, watch this season. You're definitely going to see a reflection of what is likely to happen if you end up continuing to do that. But anyway, this isn't my therapy session. There was one particular scene that caused a lot of conversation on the internet.
The form of this cute Asian girl, why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me? Is she gonna complete me in some way? I realized I could fuck a million women, I'd still never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Really?
So as you can imagine, that scene caused a lot of controversy and started a lot of conversation. And we are here to discuss the many things that relate to this particular monologue by Sam Rockwell's character. So I thought that it would be kind of fun for me to go through this monologue and break it down with some of my commentary as a transgender woman and share some of my perspective and some of my observations about what I think are the most common group of men who cross-dress, which is, interestingly enough, heterosexual crossdressers. But I'm getting ahead of myself as per usual. Hi, my name is katblaque, and I like to think that I make content for introspective hot people. And over here on Movies in My Closet, we watch films and TV shows that reflect culture. And I come and give my commentary, and you're always welcome to give yours, and you're welcome to peruse any of the various films within my closet. And if you like what you see, be sure to click my button and come up and see me sometime. So this video is actually just going to be a video version of the article that I already wrote for my website, blackandthecity.com. Black in the City is my blog where I do all of my writing, regardless of what kind of writing it is. And if you're interested in any of my extended thoughts about a lot of the stuff that I talk about on my YouTube channels, that is definitely the place to go check that out. Please subscribe to my blog so that I can get more of my stuff to show up in your guys' feed. I really appreciate those of you guys who comment on my blog. It means a lot to me to read those comments. But anyway, we are going to be going through this monologue and I'm going to be giving you my thoughts. So before we do that, I want to set some foundation because we got to establish this right away. We're going to be talking about a very specific type of crossdresser in this video. And I want to make it very clear that we even have the concept of cross-dressing because it is still considered to be quite taboo for men to wear women's clothing, right? So while we're going to be talking about a particular type of cross-dresser, I want to make it very clear that not all men who cross-dress are necessarily doing these things or feeling this way about cross-dressing. For the men that we're going to talk about in this video, they are predominantly cross-dressing as a reflection of their personal views of women. Not all men who cross-dress do it in that way. And I feel like it's really important to establish that so that we don't stigmatize people too much, because I had to figure out with time that cross-dressers come in many different shapes and sizes. Not all of them are like this, but I think for a lot of women, These are probably going to be the most commonly found crossdresser, the people that you're probably going to interact with the most. So when I say that in my experience, they're the most common, I want to also predicate this conversation by saying that that's from my own experience. I'm going to be talking about people that I've actually had experiences with, because one of the things I appreciated about this monologue is, in my opinion, it really clearly laid out the very common patterns that you see amongst heterosexual crossdressers. And for me, having interacted with so many heterosexual crossdressers, it just seems like a thing that we all need to talk about, especially as we see misogyny in our society become louder. Because look, I predominantly had my experience with heterosexual male crossdressers when I was living in conservative areas. And yes, these men had conservative politics more often than not. Not all of them do, but for these men, and this is why we're talking about this very specifically, for these men, a lot of what this is a way that they have fetishized the gender binary and the limited space that they allow themselves to have as men, and the way that they personally interpret what a man's role and what a woman's role is in our society. And so I thought this was a great little monologue to break that down. And I know that some people who have had experiences with people like this will probably tell you that these things are very common. So let's get into it. So if you have not seen the show, I will just really quickly give you a summary of where we are at this particular point in the show. In White Lotus, there's a character named Rick. Rick is the character who is in a relationship with a woman who, she just thinks that he is just so great and they're just meant to be together. And oh my gosh, like he's just so amazing and he's just such a sweet soul. And maybe, everyone else can't see it, but I can. And, like, girl, I've been there. This was the girl, look, ooh, this character is a little triggering to me because I've been that girl many times. But Rick, as a character, he comes to Thailand because he wants to kill the man who he thinks killed his father. And so he needs to get a gun. And so he reaches out to his friend, Frank, who knows how to get a gun for him in Thailand because he's lived in Thailand for a few years. So the meeting that we're seeing right now is going to be the meeting that happens when they pass that gun off between each other. A meeting that Rick was expecting to be a joyous blowout like many of the ones that they've had before. Because in the past, when they used to hang out, they used to party and get crazy and do all types of things. But at this point in time, Frank is sober. Frank doesn't want to do those things. And we're supposed to see this moment in their relationship as a moment of temptation for Frank. A moment where Frank might be pulled into something that he's worked very hard to pull himself out of. And this monologue is a description of what he sees as the lowest point in his life. I thought that we would go through it, dissect it, and I would give you a good description of all the things.
Well, I moved here because I had to leave the States, but I picked Thailand because I always had a thing for Asian girls, And when I got here, I was like a kid in a candy store. If you got money, no attachments, nothing to do, I started partying. Yeah. It got wild. I was picking up girls every night. Always different ones. Petite ones, chubby ones, older ones, sometimes multiple ladies a night.
So this is a great establishment of the kind of guy this often is. He came to Thailand and he had a fetish for Asian women. And he saw that his dollar would go very, very far. And he started to kind of gorge himself with women. Now, why is this important? Heterosexual male crossdressers quite frequently have a very curated, particular idea of masculinity. Similarly, they also have a very particular curated idea of femininity, right? But they have these sort of expectations of what things are supposed to be within a relationship. And they cling to these things. and they cling to them in a sort of binary sort of way. So when this monologue first came out, a lot of people were trying to have a conversation about autogynephilia. Autogynephilia, for those of you guys who don't know, is a term that was coined by Ray Blanchard. It is a term that's supposed to describe men who essentially get a sexual kick off of the image of themselves as women. Now, I've often made the argument that autogynephilia as a concept isn't really a accurate descriptor, and it's a term that really tends to exist just to stigmatize transgender women. It's usually used to invalidate certain trans women's access to care. For example, if you're a trans woman who's attracted to women, that would be a reason why you're not a real trans woman and therefore don't deserve access to care. These ideas really only exist to gatekeep transgender women from their care. And so I am not a fan of autogynephilia in the way that it's often used, which is pretty exclusively just to stigmatize, especially a specific type of trans woman, right? But that being said, I've often said that this is a very observable pattern among heterosexual male crossdressers. Heterosexual male crossdressers who develop usually a very curated sense of femininity that they often perform and exhibit for other crossdressers. Crossdressers will create an entire persona that is cultivated with a particular look, a particular way of expressing themselves. And they will upload these images that are often posed in the way that they would enjoy seeing a woman posed. And so to me, this sort of thing definitely exists, but it exists amongst heterosexual male crossdressers. Now, one of the things to note about this group of crossdresser is that they tend to have very black and white views of gender. And typically, these are not people who are maybe trans, maybe there's a little bit of gender questioning amongst some people, and maybe some trans people might initially think that they're cross-dressers, but then once they start to cross-dress, it starts to feel a little bit too gender affirming. But for these particular group of cross-dressers, a lot of the way that they specifically curate their feminine appearance is really a reflection of the type of woman that they sexualize, the type of woman that they fetishize quite frequently. And so they get turned on by creating tableaus of the type of thing that would typically excite them. So to me, it is a thing. It is a thing. It's just not a thing in the way that people often try to say that it's a thing. For a lot of these men, they want to be the hyper masculine male provider figure within a relationship. That is a sort of man that they want to be. And that's important because that often relates to the type of woman they eventually imagine themselves to be. Because for these men, the women that exist in their lives really don't exist for reasons other than validating and reinforcing their masculinity. And quite frequently, these men will abuse these women, and that'll be the thing that will define them as masculine. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because they view women as needing to remain in this sort of dejected position within their relationships, whereas they see their masculinity and their maleness as reliant on this ability to command the attention of many women. I say all that to say that these men also have a fetishism for masculinity and what they want to experience as a masculine person.
I was out of control. I became insatiable.
Yeah.
And, after about 1,000 nights like that, you start to lose it. I started wondering, where am I going with this? Why do I feel this need to fuck all these women? What is desire? The form of this cute Asian girl, why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me? Is she gonna complete me in some way? I realized I could fuck a million women, I'd still...
So it's worth noting, okay, what he just said there, right? He said that this little Asian girl is the opposite of me, right? The opposite. So in his mind, the natural positioning of things, white men on top, Asian women on bottom, they're polar opposites. It's important to keep that in mind because that is something that comes into play when he cross dresses.
Never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Really?
You know?
Not really.
No, really.
Really?
So, one night I took home some girl, turned out to be a lady boy, which I'd done before, but this time, instead of fucking the lady boy fucked me.
Oh, okay. This is an important part of the puzzle because one of the only reasons why I have so much interaction with crossdressers is because crossdressers quite frequently view transgender women as vehicles for their experimentation, as maintaining this position between genders that would allow them to be a bit more open minded and accepting to their fluidity, so to speak. So, in my life, I've had a lot of men that I've dated who I have later discovered were crossdressers. And it always shocked me because typically, if I'm attracted to someone, they are fairly masculine. It's been shocking to me because a lot of times it's not even that they're cross-dressing, it's that they're the complete opposite of what they said they were to me. I had a situation, I talked about this in my video about Josh Cedar, where I had met this guy. He was like the image of like masculine white dude in suburbia. And this was one of those guys who was like, yeah, I only date like the most passable, the most feminine transgender women. And I was like earlier in my trans life, right? And he randomly came to one of the events that was happening at my school. I walked up to him and he like flipped out when he saw me and physically ran the opposite direction, right? I had no idea why he had done that because the way that we had been talking, it would have given me the idea that he would be excited to see me. But as it turns out, not so much. Then I was online later and I found this other profile that had a person with a very similar look, we'll just say, very similar features. And it was this crossdresser and it was him. And on his like crossdresser profile, he's a BBC slut who loves it raw and likes to be misused and abused and all this other shit. Like, I kid you not, it was the polar opposite. And it's always so shocking to me because you can just be a dude and get fucked. You know, you can be a dude and get degraded if that's something that you're into, right? But these men, it's like they can only allow themselves to have some of these experiences if they are cross-dressed. And for a lot of men who are in this position, they look at a trans woman and they say, all right, she can be as beautiful and gorgeous as like a cis woman, right? But because she's transgender, she's probably more likely to be open-minded and accepting of me. And, you know, I've had a lot of really miserable arguments with cross-dressers because I feel the way that I do, right? And one of the things that you end up seeing, and this is going to be part of this monologue too, is like sometimes cross-dressers have this like misplaced ego where they think that they are better than you and they think that they're cuter than you and they think that you're basically the same, even though, you know, they're a dude who cross-dresses and you're a trans person who, you know, usually has done more than just wear clothes to be who you are. It's a thing I've experienced quite a bit. And quite often these men do have the expectation that if they are going to be with a transgender woman, that they are the one that ends up being on the receiving end of things. And for me, physically, that's just not possible. So I disappoint these men quite a bit.
And it was kind of magical. And I got in my head that what I really wanted was to be one of these Asian girls getting fucked by me and to feel that. So I put out an ad looking for a white guy, my age, come over and fuck me. Found a guy looked a lot like me. Then I put on some lingerie and perfume, made myself look like one of these girls. And I thought I looked pretty hot. And then this guy came over and railed the shit out of me. And then I got addicted to that. Some nights 3, 4 guys would come over and rail the shit out of me. Some I even had to pay. And at the same time, I'd hire an Asian girl to just sit there and watch the whole thing. I'd look in her eyes while some guy was fucking me, and I'd think, I am her, and I'm fucking me.
This is a good example of what I'm talking about with like their way of binary thinking, right? Like he couldn't think, I am me, a white man being fucked by another white man who happens to look a lot like me. He needed to think about it in terms of, I am this degraded Asian woman who is a sex worker who is being fucked by this white dude, right? That's the lack of being able to think of themselves as people who could function beyond that. They can't imagine themselves as men having sex with men. They can't imagine themselves even as men in lingerie having sex with other men, right? Like they have to imagine themselves as degraded women having sex with men who are just like them, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. A lot of times, crossdressers will have a very curated sense of beauty. Some of them will often think that women today aren't as feminine as they could be. A lot of crossdressers that I've known, maybe this is just my age range, but a lot of the crossdressers that I've interacted with have a very particular fetish for 1980s like pinup model type girls. And so they will mourn the loss of like pantyhose and fishnets and certain things that were a little bit more common back then. Things that today a lot of modern women would look at and be like, this is kind of like matronly and not really that cute or sexy, but they long for like a femininity that used to be. And a lot of these men will think that they could actually put themselves together good enough to basically do a better job than most women. That's kind of where the ego kind of comes from, right? Like he talks about how he dressed up just like these girls, right? How he looked like these girls, and he didn't, right? Like there's no way in hell that he, you know, looked just like one of the girls that he was probably fucking, because why? He probably has high standards for these transgender women, right? He's probably not having sex with the just starting to go on hormones trans girl. He's probably having sex with the really pretty girls that have had work done, right? But even though that's the case, even though he has that expectation, with a day of cross-dressing, he is just as beautiful as they are. He looks like them. He didn't, I'm sure, but in his mind, he does. In his mind, he believes that he does. And that's kind of worth pointing out, because that's also their own conception of a woman's position too, that they have to be beautiful and vain and specifically fixated on that and stuff like that. I'll say this, heterosexual male crossdressers are very fascinating people, purely because they have a way of creating these distinct worlds for themselves. Like when that guy freaked out when he saw me, he freaked out because I was creating a glitch in his matrix, right? Like I was not supposed to know that version of him. You know, because I've had a lot of interactions with these guys, there are a few of them that I've known of and kept up with over the years. And one of the things that is interesting to me about them is that they are not people who are really probably ever gonna break away from it. Like they have the binary, and you would think that someone like this would probably respond really well to like having a woman who accepts him and embraces him and things like that. But for a lot of these particular cross-dressers, they like the secrecy of it. They like the sort of like dangerous nature of it. They like the edge. They like the drugs. They like the this and the that. The fact that it's like a different version of themselves, that they can think of it as a different version of themselves.
Hey, we all have our Achilles heel, man, you know. Where does it come from? Why are some of us attracted to the opposite form?
Yeah.
And some of us the same. Sex is a poetic act. It's a metaphor. Metaphor for what? Are we our forms? Am I a middle-aged white guy on the inside too? Or inside, could I be an Asian girl?
And in his mind, of course, an Asian girl is only one thing, right? An Asian girl can only be one way. An Asian girl can only perform one particular position within a relationship, right? I write about this a bit more in my blog post, but for a lot of these men, a lot of this is based in fantasy. They have like a fantasy about what their interactions with women are supposed to be. And for some of these men, they do go to places like Asia to find women who, because of finances, have to perform certain roles for them.
Guess I was trying to fuck my way to the answer. And then I realized that I gotta stop the drugs, the girls, trying to be a girl. I got into Buddhism, which is all about, spirit versus form, detaching from self.
So for some of these men, they will develop a drug habit. Some of these men will, for example, use apps like Grindr to meet men who have crystal meth. Crystal meth is a very popular drug. And a lot of them are trying to enter into a headspace where they could maybe allow themselves to do some of this stuff, right? So some of these men, they may do things like meth to put themselves into a headspace for which they can have sex with men. And for some of these men, they may think that all of these things are connected, like they're only having sex with men because they do drugs, for example. So they may just see all of these things as part of the same like sin and discard all of it at once, right? And so it's really common for cross-dressers to go through this sort of pattern of, I'm going to go have an account, meet up with a bunch of dudes and have a lot of very dangerous, high-risk sex, right? And then, oh my God, I need to stop doing what I'm doing. I need to get rid of all of my stuff. I need to hide all of my things and then repent. A lot of these men are religious. A lot of these men come from religious families or backgrounds. It's really common. And like the thing for me that's interesting about these men is that they never really just allow themselves to maybe accept that they like dick and that's just the thing that they enjoy and that they can also get down with degradation. Like, I want to make something clear, right? As a person who is kinky, as a person in the BDSM community, I am not going to yuck anybody's degradation kink, right? Whatever floats your boat. My issue, though, with this particular type of crossdresser is that they crossdress mostly because they want to be degraded. I think that's worth discussing because, unfortunately, I have seen many a heterosexual crossdresser string along some poor girl who really didn't deserve it. I've seen that so many times. Like, I've known crossdressers who they cheat on their girlfriends and they like use their girlfriend's clothing for meeting up with men, and they get off on that. They get off on the fact that they committed some taboo, right? Where they stole a piece of their girlfriend's clothing and then used it for a nefarious purpose, right? And they're getting off on that. They're getting off on the fact that happened. I'm not a fan of that. I am not a fan of that sort of stuff. All right, so that's how it ends. So yeah, I thought that this really perfectly laid out at least what I have observed amongst a lot of heterosexual male crossdressers. They're typically men who have a very particular idea of what men are supposed to do and what women are supposed to do within a relationship. And they like to cross-dress to play the role that they would like a woman to play in a relationship with them. And they often think that they are great at playing this role, maybe even better than a real woman, maybe even better than a transgender woman, right? This is how they think about it, not the way that I would think about it, right? View femininity as inherently degrading, and they view women as these people to be degraded, and that is a huge part of why they're practicing their kink. My estimation is that some of these men, if they had self-reflection on masculinity and what healthy masculinity could look like, I think a lot of these men can shift and change and grow in a more positive direction. Not all cross-dressers are misogynist. Not all cross-dressers cross-dress because they look at women and think of women as lowly, abused creatures. Not all people who enjoy degradation in feminine clothing are necessarily doing that because they hate being a woman, or they hate women, or they hate femininity. These nuances can exist, right? They often just need to recognize the wider range that we can be in, because a lot of these men, they really keep their life as men and their life as cross-dressers so separated that if any person crosses over in the address book, it's like an issue. It's a huge issue. And that's just not the way to live. I've known so many like that at this point. I've known so many cross-dressers who cross-dress in secret, and even if they've got a girlfriend, even if they've got a partner, they still do what they do, meeting up with men in very dangerous and risky ways. It is not an existence that I personally envy. So with all that being said, them discussing it is a reflection of how close these characters are, and I thought that was a really well done piece of writing and a really accurate portrayal of this particular group of crossdresser. So anyway, I'm so curious to know what you guys thought of the third season of The White Lotus. I would love to hear your comments in the comment box below. Let me know what you thought about this particular monologue. There's a lot of commentary that, of course, I'm not going to be able to make. I am not Asian, so I know that there's a whole other nuance that I'm probably missing to this. But I wanted to share my thoughts nonetheless, and so I hope you guys enjoyed them, and I hope you guys enjoy what I make over here and also on my main YouTube channel. And if you do enjoy those things, please check me out on Patreon. Patreon is where I share a lot of exclusive content. A lot of times for this channel, if I'm working on a video, I will make notes that I will then upload as like exclusive content for my Patreon folks. So if you're into that, go check out my Patreon. I'm going to give a shout out to the last 3 people who joined my Patreon. Shout out to Howell Taylor, KP the Druid, and Juliana Pechovic. Thank you so much for joining me on Patreon and supporting my work over there. It means an awful lot to me, and I hope I can continue to deliver content to you guys that you enjoy. Anyway, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time, and I want you to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye. Bye.